is
because I think that's the bottom line. Because we agree some
okay.
curation needs to happen, but in an abstract sense.
I'd be happy to talk about curation. I can kind of present the views that are in the white paper and I've written down before, and
but maybe I can start, because I think my view of curation is very limited. Because when I talk about the messy base layer, curation is really the minimal subset that any rational human being hopefully agrees on, and it is really like weeding out non sequiturs. It is, I mean, just pure noise, spam, and exact duplicates. That for me is the only curation that I intend to do on my messy base layer I refer to in Hangouts.
I think we can state more or less the features that the curation is meant to support, right? One is the deduplication, the canonicality, right? And another is, maybe I would consider it the readability. It's the goal of being able to look at a claim and understand in under a minute the pros and cons, and hopefully the most relevant pros and cons. And
let's take a step back, because when you say deduping and readability, are you talking about claims only, or are you talking about arguments? Because deduping arguments is something different than deduping claims. So
I'm talking about claims. Deduping arguments is also an interesting thing to talk about, and I would propose that claims are automatically, or arguments are automatically deduped if you have deduped the claims, because you shouldn't have the same premises leading to the same conclusion twice. You can have support and oppose. I can see support and oppose as being two arguments using the same premises and same conclusion. And I think that's a sign that needs more work. But if you have the same premises leading to the same conclusion twice, should the system permit that? Should you create that twice?
I'm just, small parenthesis, not important. I have a lot to say about curation, but just on this specific point, this assumes formalization, right? I mean, otherwise, for example, two sets of premises that are equivalent via some logical transformation like De Morgan's law would not be identified as equivalent. So you need formalization to show the equivalence and do the
wait, what is the law here?
De Morgan, not A or B is equal to not A and not B, not A and not B.
So you're talking about like multi-premises and reverse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you want to support multi-premise, then yes, you need to formalize it.
Yeah, if you want to deduplicate arguments. Now that's a parenthesis. I'd like to take a step back as well, but maybe you want to finish then.
Well, yeah, so that was my parenthesis in answering the question about, do I only mean deduping claims or deduping arguments? And I would say, we can start with deduping claims, as I understand our agreement would be in deduping claims.
Yes, I think so, because in other words, what I guess I'm trying to say is that I don't want to dedupe arguments, because I think arguments are very subjective, like the best way to represent them. And I just want to group all of them, throw them in a bunch together. As long as they all point to the same claims, I'm happy.
Well, an argument that is a single premise with a single conclusion with a relationship of support, is it subjective or objective to, are you going to allow that twice?
No, of course not. That's what I mean by aggregating them together. Like, if it's the exact same premise, targeting the exact, part of the reason I don't want multi-premise, I am very reluctant to do that, is exactly because it allows aggregating like that more easily.
Right. Although you can't avoid multi-premise. You can't.
No,
you
but
can
that's
prevent it from happening and then have it happen.
no,
but
support it.
his choice is to disregard it, right?
on
It's a
on a
choice.
base
Right.
messy
I
layer.
don't agree
exactly,
with it,
because,
but
yeah, on a base
Okay,
messy layer,
okay.
I don't necessarily want to discard it on like, if you
Okay.
want to represent a better argument, one particular point of view on, for example, CDL on a second layer, I'm not against that. It's more like for the purpose of the messy layer where you can always go to falsify what people are saying. I think multi-premise might not necessarily be needed as a formalism.
Oh, I
Might
don't
even
want
hamper
to.
it.
I don't want to distract from this conversation. I don't want to change the conversation. Unfortunately, I just remembered something that I consider something of an advancement or a breakthrough that happened in maybe the last time you and I were talking or something, which was, let me state this and then you let it sink in, and then I just request maybe we give it a half an hour before we come back to this question. If you, I just want to state it so I don't forget it, but I know it can totally derail this conversation. The question we've been struggling with about standalone claims versus fully defined or formalized or canonical claims versus interpreted, all that, right? I came to the conclusion that my understanding of Stephen's standalone claim, I would call statement. Because my understanding is that the unique, what makes the standalone claim unique is the actual text, the language. And I don't see that, I see that as being kind of like a step towards what we would call maybe the fully defined canonical claim. And Stephen would like there to be debate on a statement. In other words, something not fully disambiguated, something not at all disambiguated. And I found that I could accept that if we, you know, we allow debate to happen on something called a statement. It just means like okay, that's the kind of debate that is meant to show some of the ambiguity of language, right? And then I would call a claim being something that is like a disambiguated statement. But both of them are claims in the object sense. They share this thing that you can add supporting and opposing arguments and that sort of thing. So they're related. It's more that I would use the name statement for what he calls a standalone claim.
I have a question then.
So stop 1 sec. This is something I tried to get in depth in last Friday. I got a lot of pushback. I did write more about this, and I propose we go in depth in this next Friday and keep on the topic of curation now.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. We can table this and come back to it Friday.
Well, I just have a question. I don't have comments. I just have a question to understand what you're saying.
Go ahead.
Is the difference between claim and statements, does it lie in the eye of the beholder, or would you model them differently?
Well, there's definitely shared.
Okay, we're getting into Friday.
Data.
Okay.
So no, I can answer like just that quickly that question. I do see them having a shared relationship in an object or class model. I don't see them as being.
But that doesn't answer the question. I didn't ask shared. I said, like, is it a person that decides something is a statement or a claim, or do you see an actual formalized difference you want to formalize in a system? Now you're hinting at you do want to formalize a difference.
I think I do want to formalize the thing, but it would take an hour-long discussion because I don't have a fully formed idea. So we'd have to work through the idea.
That's
which I do.
Yeah.
I do have a fully formed idea about this. So and I want to not get into it today, though I could, but then that's today. And I propose let's not do that. Anything more about curation, or should I get into my ideas of curation? And Felix has a lot to say about curation as well.
Yeah, we all have a lot to say about curation, but we were going through the base layer, Stephen's base layer view of what would be there. One was deduplication of claims, and the other was weeding out non sequiturs.
Okay.
And I was saying that I see that as having a similar goal to a more complete, I would say, or formalized, or whatever version of that, which isn't just weeding out non sequiturs, but prioritizing the arguments that seem to be the most relevant. And that goes into scoring definitions, and
Yeah, exactly.
Not the eye of the
because for me,
beholder, but more. Yeah, it could be in the eye of the scoring algorithm, or it could be in the eye of the beholder. But I do want to see that there. But I see that as being a more advanced version of where you stop at just non sequitur. Right.
I want to get into that at some depth. First, when we speak about curation, for me, it was always clear that there were two kinds of views. For me, it's always been clear that the global system is too complex to be viewed. There's no global view. There's local and more or less local views. And there's curated views, which are, some of which are handcrafted, which are, this is how I think you can approach the topic. Here are my view of what's the main points. And then you should be able to get easily from that to, okay, what's missing from this picture? What does this perspective leave out? And then you get something more complex, more richer, and more global. But for me, curated views are essential from a pedagogical standpoint. And that's the point of an encyclopedia like Wikipedia or Debatepedia. It's like, give you, here's the minimal you need to know for you to say you have the least understanding of the issue. Here's the basics. Now, the curated view will be opinionated. And what we want to help is to people get away from opinion bubbles. But that does mean we have to balance out the curated views, which I believe are essential for pedagogical purposes, to calculated, more global views, or more calculated local views. And even those, I'm not sure will be total. In that sense, I think scoring is a bit essential, and I've been trying to shy away from deciding what's true and false, because that's not our business, and I still believe that at one level. But I do believe that there is a level where we should be able to say, you know, if you just want to see, this is believed, there are a million alternative beliefs. Here's, 10 that are significant. We need to be able to do that, because otherwise there are a million alternative beliefs. And being able to make judgment calls about, this is what most people believe, this is a strong debate, this is fringe, but still maybe big enough to be important, or even this looks like nobody in the field takes that seriously, so it may be disinformation, something like that. I don't know. The use of scoring to filter out manageable, calculated local view is one of the big open problems. I don't have full solutions, but it's important to me to begin thinking about this. But meanwhile, as I've often say, for me, the important goal in hyperknowledge is, if we have two very different viewpoints and they both offer handcrafted, curated views, what is the work of creating a synthesis view from those opinionated, curated views? And for me, that's the prime act of curation, like creating a personal view is a form of curation, of course, and combining personal views into, here's the combine. That's my view of the chief act of curation, the act of creating synthesis. And that probably will mean if there's irreconcilable differences, identifying, well, this is what is common between those views, this is where it differs, and I expect the stakeholders of each opinionated view to at least agree on this score and quote unquote have this part to be only agreed on with this group and this part only agreed on with this group. But at least here's the core on which I hope to have agreement, and then let's try to expand that. So for me, that's the process of curation. It's the refactoring of curated views by combination.
So your definition is even broader. And at this point, when you say all that, and I'm inclined to say maybe I've been using curation wrong in that sense. What I'm talking about is moderation more than anything. It's more like moderating out all the fluff that doesn't help in any way, whereas curating is indeed selecting in order to do synthesis or whatever. I actually think it might be a useful distinction to make.
Fair enough.
Agreed. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I think when Timothy says curation, it's a mix of moderation and a bit of what you say, but not to the extent that you say, because he believes that there's like a good ideal canonical, but correct me if I'm wrong, Timothy, view to represent like the aggregate of all the arguments.
Yeah, I definitely take the opposite view or approach to that, which is I believe in a shared graph rather than individual graphs, and I believe that while I don't think there's an absolute best way to model a single debate. I don't think there is a canonical structure for that. I think there are definitely more or less equivalent representations. I do believe in heuristics for what makes one better than another. You know,
is that a bit of a contradiction?
I know that. Is there? No. It's not a contradiction, because there are equivalent maths in which the heuristics cannot be applied because none of the heuristics say that one is better than the other. And then there are heuristics that say, for example, having two copies of the same claim is a pretty absolute heuristic that we all agree we do not want, right? So if you have two of the same, it says merge them somehow, right? I think that another heuristic might be, and these are all up for discussion. They're just intuitions I have. Another is that there is a best place to make an argument in the graph, which means on the extreme end, you're making it in a totally wrong place. You're making a non sequitur, right? And when I say where you're making the argument, I'm referring to what is the best conclusion to target for your argument. And I think if you look at the general to specific case we've discussed, an argument about a study on immigration in one very specific area at a very specific time can be used to prove the general case of immigration is good or bad, but it's much less relevant than using it to prove a statement about immigration at that one specific place and time. And so there's a sliding scale. You can make that same, you could post that same study as evidence in every single variation on your debate about immigration, but I see that there's one point where its relevance is highest. And so perhaps you have a more readable graph if you only make the argument there and let the effect percolate up to the rest of the debate.
Yeah, so I think at that point, would you call that curation, like deciding that it shouldn't go somewhere? And because we talked a bit about whether or not you would remove links at such a point. So my argument
yes. You want to see them
my argument there is
everywhere.
I think it's highly contextual, and there will be subjective differences. And yes, generally speaking, in the abstract form, I agree that like a certain level of specificity will be the most relevant one to point, but that's an ongoing discussion to uncover that. And for me, that's why that is something that's resolved through scoring, through people voting on
I think-
relevance. Oh, this is more relevant here. And then if
I
you have
think
the generic
all-
to specific relations, then yeah, you can have some automated hinting at, well, these three are all of the same, along the same spectrum, and people, the popular opinion says that on this spectrum, this one is the most relevant one. Like, I'm all on board with showing that. What I'm not really on board with is then removing the other ones or hiding them entirely, or for me, they're still in the messy base layer.
Okay,
So-
That's
Two
what the
things.
messy base layer is for, to uncover which
I think-
of these different forms is the most popular one, the most relevant one.
Well, I mean, I think you can do it in the layer 2 as well. And I think as much as it's subjective, we probably all 5 of us agree that of the 2 places to place a very specific study, it makes more sense to place it in a conclusion about immigration in that specific
Yes.
place than on the high level.
So my
right?
question was, where do you go to falsify that, to argue against that decision? Like, yes, I want to say, I think that's the most relevant
Right.
one.
So that's
For me, that's a
something I would
base layer.
like to design better, right? And it might, there's 2 approaches. There's 2 approaches to this. There's the centralized curator role approach, where you just don't discuss it. And there's the open sourced decision-making approach of crowdsourcing the decision, which gets much more complex, but perhaps eliminates the problem of Wikipedia or something of capture by a specific subgroup that has an opinion.
Is it
So-
really more complex? Because the crowdsourcing part is exactly what I say you do on a base layer, where you allow different levels of specificity to all target the same conclusion. The crowdsourcing is exactly which of these is the most relevant one. That's what you model in the base layer, and the outcome of that is indeed an indication of which one is most relevant by crowdsourced opinion.
I mean, I think the graph is more readable, and also you avoid certain problems with scoring algorithms by cleaning shop and pointing an argument to the right place. In other words, moving an argument from a place where it was badly placed to some place that makes it more relevant, I think produces a better graph. It's more readable for the end user.
No disagreement
better for
there.
scoring
The discussion
algorithms.
is it something you copy and filter on the layer 2? Or is it something you move? That's the discussion. There's no disagreement here that the
Right.
certain ways
So-
of presenting it is more readable.
All right, I'll answer this question, and then I'll let Marc-Antoine respond. I have and would implement it as actually moving it and leaving it in the history that there was once a link to that place and it was moved to another place. But that's the centralized approach. And when you do a crowdsourced approach, there's no decision point, and the system's not supposed to make a decision. And that's where I see a lot of the complication there. But yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, first, we agree that there's many correct ways to do this, and that there's subjectivity and in making a choice, because showing everything at once is illegible. I think we all agree on that. So the question is, do we allow a small group of moderators to autocratically say, well, this view is at least good. Other opinions may differ, but at least it gives you one curation. And this is what I keep calling a human handcrafted curated view. And for me, it's always clear that the human handcrafted curated view needs to coexist with computed views. The centralized view is saying there's one handcrafted curated view, and then, oh, you keep history, but that means you do all kinds of history traversal to show, well, on demand, well, there's always also these other ways of doing it. Or, which is, of course, the approach I'm proposing, you allow multiple handcrafted curated views, and then there's all kinds of complexity, I will agree. I mean, there's complexity one way or the other. Either there's complexity in the history or there's complexity in the multiple views, right? It's either way there's complexity. And saying, here's our curated views, which at least we know are allow the disagreement to be apparent, like these, you know, this group believes that this view represents the thing accurately and this group sees it this way. And then it becomes, in my mind, possible to make a synthesis view that makes explicit preference. But that's not my point. The point I really want to say is, in all cases, and this is really something I want to emphasize, we have curated views and we have calculated views. And they need to interact and go from one to the other. And I'd like that to be our bedrock. Now, the question is there one or many handcrafted view is what we're discussing. But I would like us to get as a bedrock, there's handcrafted views, local, and there's computed views, which aim to be more global. Is that something we have as a base vocabulary?
I'm not sure I
think
understand what
so.
you mean by computed view.
Yeah, I think the computed view is because he assumes a federated system where you have many different things and you compute the central thing, whereas Timothy and I, we are more like, well, that it is not computed, it is because it's there, it's centralized. But indeed, if you assume a federated architecture, you would have to compute that central view. Is that what you mean by computed?
Not exactly. It is one way of doing the computation, but it's not the only way. I'm also including cases where we have tons of argument and views of history, but we're filtering based on scoring. That's also computed. Scoring generates computed views, where
and I
prioritize arguments by scoring. Yeah.
I separate curation from computed views of scoring.
No, precisely. Curation is hand curation, and that's exactly what I'm saying. We have handcrafted.
No. The separation for me is in, I see curation as altering the graph, and I see scoring as just altering your view of the graph.
But if
No,
it
it's like
alters
mostly
the
like
view of the editor, then they change the graph accordingly. Like if the editor or the moderators or whoever changes the graph has the scoring mechanism in place, the type of scoring influences how they decide what to edit, what to put where.
I guess it may or may not. I mean, I think it's a separate discussion whether or not scoring influences the graph and whether or not, but I understand what you mean by computed if you decide to let the scoring influence the.
What I'm saying is I see many cases where there'll be tons of potential proposed arguments, and we use a scoring cutoff to make the view manageable. That's computed. So it's not altering the graph, but it's altering the view of the graph such that you and I don't see the same graph depending on scoring or different score.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm including that in computed view.
Yeah, there's another level where the curation is the same thing. If we do it fully crowdsourced, then probably curation is done with scoring, because then it's a question of essentially voting somehow on should these two things be merged or should this argument be moved to a different conclusion. And that would have to be done by scoring. And then it's a question of your graph looks different depending on how the scorings come out. Right?
Yeah. By the way, I started work on consensus collaborative editing of a graph. That is, if you have, or just a knowledge object, right? If you have people in charge of the knowledge object, how do you edit it? And how do you say, okay, that many people propose alterations to the knowledge object. Then if it's not a minor edit and there's a way to vote on, is this a minor edit? Then you need consensus to apply it. And if there's no consensus, what happens? Then you have a fork and then you create the conflict object. And that's an intuition I got from Brooks Alenska of Fission. Materialize conflict. If there's a conflict, materialize it. If there's a fork, materialize it. Make an object that represents, here is what the fork is about. And then you can refactor. here's the consensus part, here's the dissensus part, and get buy-in on the consensus.
My fear there is actually with capture by majority. It's rule oppression rule by the majority.
Tyranny of the majority. No, but this is exactly.
Tyranny of the majority, that's where it's like, yeah.
No, but I'm saying consensus. I'm not saying majority vote. That's exactly the point. And I'm saying if you consensus is unmanageable.
Consensus is tyranny by the minority.
Yes, let me go there. And this is why as soon as then that creates a fork. And then each person does a fork, and then you materialize the fork, and then you refactor it to say, okay, this is the consensus part, this is the dissensus part. And then you basically refactor by who agrees and who disagrees. And you get a fork by, you get a view by community.
And there's no right or wrong. It's just like,
and there's no right or wrong.
Everything. Yeah, okay.
I'm formalizing that right now.
Yeah, but that I feel that is more vulnerable to attack than a centralized curation, because what ends up happening, the tyranny of by the majority in this case is not that. Well, you're not protecting it by how do I say this? Sure, you're preserving the other view.
Yeah.
But the problem with it is that because nobody will do the work to look at the alternating view, the majority, the default option wins, right?
What do you mean do the work? That's the point of the computed views, saying any curated view always has to have the computed view at the click of a button. Nice, we said that before. And by the way, I mean, central curation is a tyranny of it's an oligarchy.
It's an oligarchy, but it's an oligarchy that can have, and I agree, it's not even close to a perfect solution. I'm just saying, I'm more afraid of tyranny of the majority than I am by the oligarchy, because in this case, if you establish very clear heuristics and rules, and you provide full access to the history, then what you can do is see that somebody is a bad actor as a member of the privileged class.
Who agrees that this action was bad? The oligarchy.
Yeah, but if it's essentially like the scientific community, right? That maintains itself and moderates itself by the scientific method. You've got an established method, and there's always going to be bad actors. But in that case, you've got a skilled group that believes and follows certain principles, and they see, oh, this person is consistently removing, essentially censoring a certain argument.
Yeah.
Right. That is the kind of thing that you can if you judge and expel somebody for doing that sort of thing.
I agree. On the one hand, we can certainly say that the track record has been that the process of eventual consistency of the scientific community has been very halting. We'll look at the reproducibility crisis. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's a good process. It's a slow process, and that's fine. But I also think there are many fields of science where that has not led to anything like not only consensus views, which I don't expect, but even commensurability of results or of even of conversations. And that is, I see as a problem. That's
yeah, but I see that as two separate things again. There's that one case is the substance, which is what we're trying to build as a system that improves the discussions over the substance.
Yeah.
But the other question, which relates to curation, is, was something a good study or not? Was it a good scientific study? And that is evaluated along things like, well, was it fully randomized, or did they, what confounders Did they eliminate, and I know we're going into the book of why and all that, if you want to keep going. But anyway, there are main points to discuss about whether or not something was a good study and what were the limitations of that study and so on. And it's the same thing with curation in terms of which arguments were deleted or hidden or moved, why were they deleted or hidden or moved. Those can be observed from other people outside the oligarchy and say, well, this is obviously.
Yeah, but okay, I guess that's my question, really. There's many questions, and I think your view of science is very much influenced by the hard science. And I read too much sociology and psychology where those arguments never die out. And not the experimental psychology, I mean the more soft. And anyway, that's a whole field, and let's not go there. But the question of who watches the Guardians, right? Are you saying that the community at large has a way to censor the oligarchy? I mean, that's really the question. To say, this oligarchy actor is not acting in the best interest. And does that become then a majority vote? And does that become?
Yeah, so there should be, yes, there should be. How does it happen? That's governance design, and I'm not an expert in that. I would want to call somebody in to.
Fair enough. That's a legit answer, because I would probably give the same. But yeah.
Which means I'm also not against. I want to crowdsource those decisions, but I don't want the system to make decisions. I don't want it to because making decisions decides on truth, and allowing you to see both adds a big onus on the viewer, and people won't do it. And so, in essence, if you can capture the majority opinion of a curation.
No, but okay, and here's my contention here. I don't expect the calculated views, and by this I mean something created by filtering of truths, to be that clear or intelligible. I expect them to be confusing, which is one thing. I do expect individual curated views to be one-sided and opinionated. And this is why I'm so interested in the human operation of creating consensus views, consensus curated views, and refactoring ruthlessly towards that. Because yeah, I'm dubious. And when you say you'll do it with a community, in a way, I mean, it's the same goal, because you believe that a good number of curators is enough, but that's been Wikipedia's tack. And Wikipedia has actually a good but mixed record, right? If you're inside the Wikipedia editors,
I would consider Wikipedia a good example and a failure.
Exactly my point.
If we were to replicate and have the same sort of controversial outcome as Wikipedia, I would consider that a failure, right?
Okay, we agree.
Yeah.
And I think it's inherent to the oligarchic system.
Are you also considering Stack Overflow failure in this sense?
Much less.
I'm not aware of the controversial nature of Stack Overflow's
exactly
moderation approach.
And I think that's
Reddit is an example of I would say mixed results. Reddit is an excellent example of successful moderation and failed moderation, and it's problematic. So again, I would consider it a failure for the canonical debate as well.
Not to go beyond Reddit level. The Stack Overflow is a very good question, Felix. I do think that the problem-solving emphasis of Stack Overflow makes it much less subject to fundamental controversies. I mean, you solve or you haven't solved the problem.
There's like huge, there's been a whole movement the past 5 years or something to make Stack Exchange nicer for new users, because there's a lot of like harsh language being used. It's totally not a nice experience for new users to arrive, because they need to be taught the rules and they don't know the rules, and they start asking people that have been in the community a long time. They go like, oh, this is let's close this, it's stupid, isn't that? So I wouldn't say there aren't any problems with moderation with Stack Exchange at all. I mean, on a weekly basis, people complain about moderation actions I take, and I stop caring because people need to learn the requirements of contributing to a community before they start contributing. That's pretty much how it works. You can try to do that nicer. That's where the majority of the efforts have been placed at the past 5 years or so, and it has improved. But I wouldn't say that. Let's put it this way: a lot of users of Stack Exchange think there is an oligarchy. Definitely.
Let me bring up 2 points that I think are really relevant to this question of, if it can work or not. In 2 fundamental ways, canonical debate is different from all of these. One is, unlike Wikipedia, which in the end has to take a position on controversial topics, did this happen? Did that not happen? Did that sort of thing? The canonical debate by nature is just going to show everything, right? The controversies are, should you have merged that? Should you have relocated this argument somewhere else? Should you have, and it's open to attack. In other words, the forms of attack that can come from the oligarchy would be in suppressing something that's not supposed to be suppressed, or moving around the debate so that the scoring somehow works for one side and not the other. Those are the main forms of attacks that I see. Trying to suppress something will be clearly evident. Moving around is harder. But the other way that the canonical debate differs is, from my perspective at least, there is no personal attacks. There's no, you're not worrying about offending people because they aren't the target of things that are being said. There can be one of the, and I'm not saying that there won't be offensive things that appear on the system, and we could try to think through the different things that could appear. But a lot of the things that will be expressed, I find being a safer place to express them. If you're going to make accusations about racial groups or accusations about, I don't know, whatever. One of the goals of the canonical debate for me is to create an actual idea meritocracy, which means, the fear of, I'm getting into the philosophy of this here, but freedom of speech is problematic because people can have more power in their speech than others. And by deduplicating, I think it's a better place to express those ideas and defeat them or not in one place, and that's it. The language expressed will be something that needs to be moderated a little bit, and we can go into that. But I think it's a very different nature than Wikipedia or Stack Overflow because of those reasons.
On Wikipedia, just partial agreement.
Felix raised his hand.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Apologies.
Mark raised his hand first, but yeah.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Oh, okay, sorry. I did miss it. Apologies.
Yeah, no worries.
On Wikipedia, partial agreement. I would say that sometimes they do, often they do have the controversy, and they say there's often a controversy section even in the main page, not in the doc page. So they do often have both sides, as a matter of fact, and that's actually one of the things I think they do kind of well. In terms of, I wonder about, on the one hand, I agree with the basic goals you stated. Say we need the egregious ideas to be there and to be disproven there on the systems we're building. Canonical debate, federation, doesn't matter. We need the egregious items to be there to be attacked. On the other hand, I do more and more worry about the fire hose of lies tactic. And that way I'm beginning to wonder how well a system like ours resists the fire hose of lie tactics. And I mean, on the one hand, it should be easy to debunk the fire hose of lies. On the other hand, if we're not able to say, you know, this fact is a complete fabrication, the so-called argument is a complete fabrication, it's not sourced, it doesn't have a credible source, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm
That's why I
worried
believe
about
in a
that
popular vote. I mean,
I'll
that's why-
respond to, and then we can let Felix go, but I do want to respond to this quickly. And the main response is that I actually, this was part of the discussion with Carl in the last recorded meeting, I think,
sorry, I'm not
where he
listening yet.
brought this up. But like my opinion on this is that that's okay. I think it'll deal with it well for two reasons. One reason being that you can use scoring to show which are the claims that have no support whatsoever. They're totally, so you can use
No evidence.
Yeah, you can use some heuristic, some calculations to organize it a little. The second part is, he was it's too tiring for debunkers to go after all this stuff. And I think debunkers will be a lot more willing to do that when they see a permanent effect rather than I got to do this every time somebody tweets this sort of thing.
That's a shared goal, yes.
Stephen, you were saying something about scoring before we go to Felix, I guess.
I think it was a short summary of what you just said. I mean, that's why I have a popular vote, and voting I call scoring. So if 1,000 people emphasize the relevant claim, and then there's 100 different forms of like shitty unsupported claims, you'll quickly see, well, they didn't carry any weight.
There I disagree, because you have huge support for unsupported claims, for unevidenced claim.
Yeah, but then those are worthwhile pursuing if there's huge support for them. The attack strategy of adding a lot of unsupported ones.
I see your point.
Yeah.
Each of them will have low support. Maybe, maybe not, because I hope.
So yeah, I wanted to go a bit deeper into the oligarchy that you mentioned, because two things. One is, isn't it definition of oligarchy that it's organized? Because I think in many, no, it's not. Okay. Anyways, I think it's massively unorganized if it's a reputation-based system that's like, and everybody can be a moderator, and everybody has some moderation, has some reputation, like on Stack Overflow. If everybody can become part of it, how is that an oligarchy? If everybody is in there. Any responses to that?
No, absolutely.
Go ahead.
If there's a clear way in without the oligarchy approval, like you have these criterion, you show that you do these things correctly, then you're in automatically without oligarchy approval, then I agree it's not an oligarchy.
So yeah, anybody could go in, but I consider it a highly skilled role. It requires skill and adherence to certain rules and philosophies. So that's why it's not anybody, but it's anybody who wants to and has the intelligence to, is capable.
It's more the meritocracy.
And that way, that's why Jamie's work is important, trying to codify the requirements and the skills and this and that. That is absolutely full agreement.
I think we can learn a lot from Stack Overflow in a way that there's a learning path. Like with a certain level of reputation, you can do certain things. And you could do the same in argumentation technology.
But Stephen's point is that the learning path is not obvious enough. And that is definitely something where we can learn elsewhere. But
I think it's one of the best systems that does try to attempt. It does a pretty good job, but people will always complain. Some people will always complain.
People always complain.
And then I just say let them, right? I mean, we don't need to win everyone.
The second problem, well, the canonical debate would need to win more than others because of the fundamental absolute need for trust, right? The less trust there is, the more bifurcations, the more forks, or the more people trying to do it on their own.
But the required need of trust depends fully on how much you want to moderate. And that's also part of the reason why I, on a base layer, want to moderate as little as possible, but people at least trust that, yes, this base layer, everything is there, everything is visible, and yes, it will be messy, it won't be readable. If you then want curated views, yeah, you will need to trust the curators. Actually, one insight I had before while you were explaining, Timothy, was, for me, a curated view could, for example, be if the messy base layer has votes for everyone, then you could have a one account per person on CDL, a CDL curated view that then, based on scoring of all those recognized CDL members, automatically at a cutoff point starts filtering out the preferred representation. So you have your community moderation for a subset of users through the base layer in one view. So I really see the two like all linking together like that.
The trust issue is why I'm favoring federation over centralization. It allows people to create their bubble that they can trust and still engage with the broader ecosystem.
But shouldn't it also be possible to create these bubbles inside a centralized system? Some
Of
like
course,
private
that's possible.
Yeah, just like I explained. What if you say, I only want to, I want to see the curated view based on this cutoff metric of all those people in that group that I believe in.
That's partly true.
Votes.
That's partly true, Felix. I agree totally. Except there's another trust issue there. I expect this to also be used inside organizations for internal discussions, and they are not necessarily happy to have the system outsourced. And that way, that's not a reason.
Then you run a local instance,
but an isolated system that will communicate with the global system, right?
Yeah,
which is also an issue in many cases.
Of course, but you can choose to make it unidirectional.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, it's the hour. I don't know how strong a cutoff you all have.
I'm going to go drink a beer, so I have a strong cutoff.
Depends on how strong the beer is, I guess.
Yeah, at some point, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point, I would like to pick up the user stories that we did like many weeks ago now. I still think that was relevant, and I want to try a bit more of that. Maybe tomorrow.
Yeah, we can do that. And I also don't know for sure if I can make it for tomorrow, but I'll let you know.
It's primarily Timothy that was waiting several weeks in a row to show up for that one.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Just one last lingering thought I had back on the discussion. I don't think it's controversial. It's just to point out that there's a difficulty. I see a difficulty in implementing a reputation system. It's a contradiction of implementing a reputation system in a system that's meant to be anonymous. There's a question of how do you acquire that reputation, who's giving you thumbs up and all that stuff when maybe it's thumbs up to a claim and it accrues to you, but nobody knows. I don't know. It's something that would need to be discussed, but there's a complication there in the fact that the system has to be anonymous.
You're partly right, but this is what avatars are for. And there are ways to tie avatars to unique identities in a way that's both guaranteed and opaque, if you see what I mean.
Well, we can go into it another time. Yeah, I can quickly summarize what I do right now. My form of reputation is simply the amount of upvotes on claims you added. And yeah, indeed, that means that you can check at people's reputation. And if you then upvote and you instantly see it going up by 1, then you can infer that they added that. But then you can add in delays and stuff so ever that you only show every 10 and whatever. So there's ways of working around that.
What deserves an upvote?
Either you believe in the claim or a useful contribution, a contribution that wasn't eradicated, removed from the system, like any relevance or thing.
Just want to make sure there's no penalty for playing devil's advocate or something.
No, not at all. It's even if so, you get points if people believe or do not believe in your claim on Socrates right now. Both are valid.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pick it up next time. See you.
See you.